Welcome to your Level 4 video on subtracting integers. As we talked about a little bit in adding integers, there's a couple phrases that we can learn that would help us to understand why we're doing the methods that we're doing. These phrases are, for subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive. So, opposite operation, opposite sign. Same is true if we were subtracting a positive. Subtracting a positive is the same as adding a negative. So, we're going to look at some examples that actually will help us to see those different statements in process. So the first one we're going to look at is if we were subtracting a positive. So we have 8 minus 7. We all know this. We know it's 1. We've done this since we were probably in about 1st or 2nd grade. But let's take a look at the statement just to see how it relates back to adding integers, which is what we've already covered in this class. So here I have subtracting a positive. Subtracting a positive. So that means that if I wanted to switch this back to adding, or an addition problem, I need to add its opposite, or its negative. So here, this is the same as saying 8 plus, since this is positive, it's going to be a negative now, negative 7. So adding the opposite, subtracting a positive. So by looking at these two, we've learned in adding integers that when there are different signs, we find the difference. Well, the difference between 8 and 7, it's 1. Now we go back and say, what did we have more of? Did we have more positives, or did we have more negatives? Because whatever we cancel out, that's what's going to be left over. Well, we had more positives, as we would have seen anyway, and so that is our answer. Positive 1. And when it's positive, you can put a plus sign in front, but you don't need to. Alright, let's take another look at subtracting a negative. Negative 8 minus negative 6. Now in most cases, again, we can see that if we're subtracting the same sign, this shouldn't be too a problem. So negative 8, take away negative 6, we're left with negative 2. But let's take a look and relate it back to addition so that we can see how it relates to the problems that we've already done. So here we're subtracting a negative, so I want to change it to adding its positive. So subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive. So if I rewrite this problem, negative 8, now it's only, this is a good point, it is only the second part of the problem. So after the operation, that's getting changed. So notice how negative 8 is still negative 8. It's not changing. 8 is still 8 in our first problem. So here, we're going to add its opposite. It was negative, now it's going to be positive. So now I have the same situation I did in the first problem. I'm dealing with opposite signs, so I find the difference. The difference between these two happens to be 2. What did I have more of in the beginning? I had more negatives. So as they cancel each other, I'm still going to have some negatives left over, making my answer a negative answer. A negative 2. Okay, so we've seen a couple examples where it's pretty easy to look at the problem and see the answer without having to change it. But by changing it, we can see how we can work with problems that may not be as easily to see when we start, such as 18 minus 41. You might look at this and say, you know, I don't know what I'm doing. I definitely know that I'm trying to take away more than I had to begin with. But how do I do that? Well, I'm subtracting a positive. I would know if it's a negative because if you look at our number 2 problem, it's in parentheses. So this is clearly a positive number that I'm subtracting because I don't have it in parentheses. So, subtracting a positive is the same as adding a negative. So let's rewrite it. Okay. So there it's rewritten. Now I know that I have different signs. I need to find the difference. I need to find what's between a 41 and an 18. So for me, I'm going to actually put this in what I call the building form, or the vertical form. And to find the different means subtract them. So I can't take 8 away from 1. So I make it 11, leave the 3. 11 minus 8 is 3. 3 minus 1 is 2. And there is the difference. Now before I move on to the next problem, I still have to ask that question. What is the sign? Did I have more positive or did I have more negative? And in this problem we had more negative. So my answer stays negative. Negative 23. Alright, our last problem for today. Negative 38 minus 30. Okay, I want you to think about this one for a second. Which statement applies? Am I subtracting a positive or am I subtracting a negative? The clue here is parentheses. Do I have parentheses around these? I don't. And so I am actually subtracting a positive. So in this case, I then change the sign and change the operation. So negative 38 plus, so opposite sign, negative 30. And look at that. It's very clear to see that I'm now adding same sign integers. Something that we talked about that's actually quite easy to work with. Even though they're negative, it's add normal, keep the sign. So here I could add this in my head. A 30 and a 30 is 60, plus that 8, 68. Add normally. 68. Keep the sign. Negative. So negative 68. And that concludes our lesson on subtracting integers. Again, remember, sometimes by changing the wording or changing the operations, we can clearly see, or maybe more clearly see, what we need to do in that problem. I hope this helped, and if you have questions, remember, write them down and come back tomorrow with them.